I don't like doing my own home repairs, and when I made some videos that honestly show how much I don't like it, they seem to help a lot of other guys like me. So I thought it would be good to make this new set of videos. Guys like me have a million questions for the progressive activists that we see on the news, but nobody on TV ever asks those questions. On CNN, the host probably agrees with the activists, so his questions are weak. And on Fox News, the host just tries to make them look bad. Either way, nobody's asking the questions that might actually help us get a feel for where they're coming from, so we might actually understand them a little better. It's no surprise that people who disagree over politics are so angry at each other nowadays. So right before Christmas, me and my brother, who is himself progressive, we drove around the West and did our own interviews. We drove to 22 cities and interviewed dozens of people who support progressive causes to ask those questions that are never asked. We're not trying to change their mind or make them look bad. We just want to understand where they're coming from. These folks were brave, considering what can happen nowadays if you say one wrong thing on YouTube. And we talked about a lot of really sensitive subjects. So just leave right now if these conversations might offend you. If you stay though, I think you'll hear some things you've never heard before and have a better understanding of your fellow Americans. I did. From Boise, we drove to West Richland, Washington, where we talked to Carl Baker, who is the chair of the Tri-City Democrats and chair of the Tri-City Freethinkers. We talked about income inequality, the 2016 election of Donald Trump, and we started by talking about immigration.
I think that the core problem with the immigration situation is that our, bureaucracy there is pretty badly broken. I mean, it just isn't meant to work.
Hold on a second. That's fantastic. Meant to work. That's a great way to put it. What do you mean by that?
Well, it doesn't have as an objective, the goal of efficiently bringing people into the country who want to come here. That's not what it's trying to do. I'm not sure what it is trying to do, but it's not trying to do that. I have a friend who came to this country legally. She was born in Sri Lanka. She moved to Canada, became a naturalized Canadian citizen, and then she moved here to go to school, and she came to where I work as an intern, met a guy, and they wanted to get married. And then during the 9/11 excitement, she went back to Canada for her brother's wedding, and then they wouldn't let her back into the country. And it was years of stirring around. It just went back and forth for years, and there was just no competence there. So as a result of that, people who see an opportunity here and want to come here and work and want to come here, preferably legally, right? I mean, nobody wants to be undocumented. That's inconvenient at best, but that's their option, right?
What do you think would be the goal, though? Because I do believe that conservatives and progressives differ a great deal on what they think the goal of immigration should be.
Right. I think it's very hard to keep people out. I think walls don't work, and I get that there's a lot of people here already, but, given that option versus just blocking people out, I think blocking people out is probably not good. 150 years ago, we just had an open border policy, right? If you wanted to live here, you just showed up. I wouldn't want us to go back to that necessarily. I don't think that seems like a good plan. I mean, it seems like if somebody shows up, you'd ought to be able to know who they are and document them a little bit and know where they're living, and maybe they need a little hand to get started and, all that kind of stuff. So,
Would there be criteria where you would say, well, sorry, we don't want you, either we don't like,
Boy, I sure hope so. I mean, yeah. Yeah, no, I wouldn't want to just...
So what criteria would you use then?
I would think, somebody who's just gone to the criminal side and kind of stayed there, that kind of thing,
okay.
Even when they had an option.
What they bring to the country, is that something you would consider if they're completely benign, no criminal history,
yeah.
But they just don't have a lot to offer? They don't speak the language, they don't have any advanced degrees, they don't have particular skills.
They're still motivated to come here, right? And because they don't have those skills, we don't know what skills they might be able to develop, right? What can they learn? Sure. What can they do once they get here?
Okay.
There's always going to be some demand, at least, for low-skilled jobs. I mean, these farm
right.
jobs, picking asparagus and stuff,
okay.
The people who are here now just won't take the job at any price, so,
That brings up a great point. Do you think, for people who are American citizens already, who are low-skilled, do you think there's a valid fear that immigration is going to decrease their wages or compete with them in any way?
Well, I mean, everybody's fear is valid, right? I mean, it's your feelings, right? And so I wouldn't want to tell somebody, don't be afraid, but I would kind of want to point out that, that's not really what the evidence says about where people's jobs are lost to, right? People's jobs are lost to automation mostly these days. A little bit of overseas type stuff, but mostly it's automation. And it's like, well, if your job can be done by a machine, you probably kind of have a terrible job. And the kids who were brought here when they were 2 by their parents, they're here as part of our broken system. It seems like we kind of have to take responsibility and ownership of that and say, well, okay, this is kind of our fault. There's really nothing else we can do other than kind of let you in.
Yeah. I would feel bad to give them citizenship simply because of all the guys that have waited for the 10 or 15 years or whatever.
I suppose, you could make that argument about the long waits. And why is anyone waiting that long? Certainly if you wanted to let them wait, get them a green card and then let them wait until, for a while. But it's, again, I don't know, I mean, they're here, they're participating, why not let them vote? That's about the only thing you get from a citizenship versus a green card.
Yeah. Now, the objection that just springs to my mind is that it just isn't, it's fundamentally not fair to give them the same rights as the people who played by the rules.
Yeah, but, as little kids who arrived, as little kids, they didn't get to make the choice. Versus other people
kids
who did.
suffer from their parents' decisions all the time.
Right. But my response would kind of be, well, let's make it easier for everybody and not make it be so burdensome.
Okay. And just so you know, the reason I'm scared to death of that is, I used to work at Disney World, right? At Disney, they know what happens when people butt in line. It is the worst thing for morale, for happiness, for everything.
Right.
It introduces a poisonous atmosphere everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't understand why our Congress doesn't get that.
Yeah.
When you allow people to simply jump in the front of the line, it engenders a tremendous amount of ill will from the people who've played by the rules.
Right, yeah.
Does nobody see that? I would like looking Hispanic not to mean that there's some percent of the population that looks at you and wonders in the back of their head, I wonder if they're here legally or not.
Yeah.
That's just that's not...
It's not a great way to live, right?
When you talk to the people for whom the border crossed them instead of them crossing the border, that's why they don't like illegal immigration. I'm sorry, this is completely... Let's stop and restart. You had talked about economic inequality. So do you think there is a problem with economic inequality in this country? Do you think there's a problem with capitalism in this country?
Yeah, I kind of do. And, if we look at the successful societies in the world and we look at when instability happens and when things start coming apart, it tends to be when the income, disparity gets really wide.
Okay, so you see this as a practical thing.
Yeah, it's not just equity, it's also this practical thing of, hey, if we keep going down this road, all the money is going to be in one person's pocket. There won't be any money in anyone else's pocket. Okay. And then it's like things don't work anymore, right?
No, good point. Okay, good. And there's probably countries where the income distribution is more equitable and they're probably very benign countries. Is that kind of is that what you're kind of looking at?
Denmark and Sweden and those kind of things where the income equality is more even. And it's like, because the guy with all the gold, he just puts it in a cave and parks a dragon on top of it and it doesn't do any work anymore. Money's useful and good and valuable when it's moving around. If
then the natural kind of distribution, unfettered by any kind of government interference, is that some people become Bill Gates, other people become more like me and you,
right?
Then is that something where we actually justify the government getting involved?
From my perspective, of course, I have not too much issue with having the government just come in and get pretty directly involved. And, it's kind of interesting, if you go back and look some years ago in our history when the top marginal rate on income tax was 90%. And what happened is nobody made that much money, right? Because if you're on the board of directors at a big company and you're looking at your CEO and he wants to be earning $10 million a year. He wants $10 million a year to go into his pocket. Well, you have to pay out $100 million in order for that to happen, right? Because 90% of it's going to go to the government for taxes. And as the board of directors, you're going to say, that doesn't, let's find something else to do with that $100 million.
Okay. Do you think at any point, as you collect more in taxes from people or distribute more of their wealth, it's a disincentive for them to do more work, to create more value?
Technically, yes. I mean, yeah, but I don't see people doing that really.
Well, do you think, would you argue that there's some kind of a sweet spot we need to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's definitely, I would say, a sweet spot, I think. I don't know. I mean, I might have to think about that more. But what I don't see is, you know, if that CEO can only make $1 million instead of $10 million, it's not like he's going to stop being a CEO, or he's going to be, you know, a tenth of good as a CEO as he was if he was going to make all that much more money, right? I mean, at some point, he's at the top of his game. He's doing his best work, and, you know, it doesn't, you know, paying him a whole huge pile more money doesn't really get you much return, right?
I saw a tremendous spike in activity, and people have told me this as well, after Trump was elected. Tremendous spike in activity.
Yes.
Is that what your experience was?
I am part of that spike of activity, I would say.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So what is it exactly about the Trump election or Trump's personality that has motivated you so much?
Yeah. Well, so I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of NPR type shows and stuff like that on these podcasts. And so it's a lot of thought piece type stuff, people talking to people from history, people, you know, people who have studied in depth all kinds of things. And it was the casual comparisons that were made between Trump and what he's doing now and what Hitler did in the early 30s. You know, there's some scary things happening here with this, you know, fear of the other, with all of this otherizing of everybody who's not an older, rich, white Christian male, and pointing out all those people as being, you know, having something wrong with them and not being human almost.
So, and that's the nub of the question. I see those same things. I've watched Trump a great deal. I wish he wouldn't look so much like Benito Mussolini when he speaks.
I think Mussolini is probably a more fair comparison,
He
actually.
is. He's got a lot of the gestures. He's just like...
And I think the policies are actually, you know, more in line with him than Hitler.
But what can he do? I mean, you know, he's a man that should stay away from physical comedy. It just never works for him, right? We both watch the same stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, hey, wow, this is a guy that's actually talking about the worries I have about immigration in a way that nobody's talked about it. And I would be hard-pressed to understand how you would do it in a way that would please progressives.
Yeah.
How do you talk about something that, I mean, he said the ultimate is that whole thing about rapists, Mexican and rapists. I see this outrage that he's called all Mexican rapists. And I'm saying, look, we both watched the same thing. He's not an elegant speaker. I don't know if that was in his script exactly worded that way.
Right.
But the point he's made over and over again is, look, some of the guys are bad hombres, right?
Yeah.
But we see this outrage that he's just, he's calling all Mexicans rapists.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does seem kind of, I mean, you know, regardless of the actual words, the intent behind it really seemed pretty harsh.
Okay, good. So I can respect that. You think these are the dog whistles, the so-called dog whistles that he's giving to people.
Right, right. And of course, you know, to go back and look at the actual numbers, people talk about, you know, immigrants versus non-immigrants and that kind of thing. And it's like, it seems like, yes, there are some, you know, bad hombres that come across, but as far as anyone can tell by running the numbers, if anything, it's a little bit lower among immigrants than the native-born population.
Okay. Oh, this is great. Thank you so much for your time. We could talk all day, and I just really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
That ends another interview in the series. That was Carl Baker, chair of the Tri-City Democrats and Tri-City Freethinkers, who's from West Richland, Washington. I'd like to once again thank Carl for sitting down with me last December to do this interview. I hope you consider supporting the series by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks.